There are moments in history so dramatic, so improbable, and so perfectly timed that they sound more like scenes from a movie than real life. And yet, buried inside the dusty corridors of European financial history lies one such moment. A moment when a single family, armed with nothing but nerve, connections, and a network faster than any government on earth, allegedly outplayed entire empires. This is the story of the Rothschilds, the courier who outran Napoleon's armies, and the rumor, or perhaps the reality, that the most powerful banking dynasty in Europe was built on one of the boldest financial gambles in human history. It is a story of war, deception, ambition, and a race not for a crown or a throne, but for information. And it begins long before Waterloo. To understand how the Rothschilds rose to such extraordinary power, we first have to understand the world they operated in. In the early 1800s, Europe was a playing field of kings, emperors, armies, and intrigue. Communication was slow. Governments were slower. A message could take days, even weeks, to travel from one country to another. And in an age when empires could collapse overnight, fast information wasn't just convenient, it was priceless. That's what made the Rothschild family so dangerous, not their wealth, but their speed. The patriarch, Meyer Amschel Rothschild, had placed each of his 5 sons in different financial capitals across Europe: Frankfurt, Paris, Vienna, Naples, and, most importantly, London. To outsiders, this looked like a clever family business arrangement. But in reality, it created something closer to a continent-spanning intelligence network faster than royal messengers, faster than military couriers, and in some cases, even faster than the very governments that ruled Europe. And at the center of this web sat Nathan Rothschild in London, a man of almost frightening energy and ambition. By 1815, Britain had spent decades fighting Napoleon. War is expensive, and Britain needed loans, massive loans, to keep its armies moving and its alliances intact. Nathan Rothschild, with his uncanny ability to mobilize capital across borders, became essential. Many historians argue he effectively became Britain's unofficial central banker during the war. Others go further, suggesting that without the Rothschilds, Britain might not have been able to afford the fight at all. Whether or not that is an exaggeration, one thing is certain. Nathan Rothschild had positioned himself so that the fate of Europe, the survival of Britain, and the fall of Napoleon all ran directly through his counting house. But then came the moment that would change everything: Waterloo. On the 18th of June, 1815, British and French forces clashed in what would become one of the most decisive battles in history. The entire future of Europe depended on what happened on that muddy Belgian field. But the battle was far away. Communication was slow, and the London financial markets hung in uncertainty. If Britain lost, the government would collapse under its war debts. British bonds known as consols would become worthless. If Britain won, those same bonds would skyrocket in value. For investors, it was the ultimate all-or-nothing gamble. For Nathan Rothschild, it was an opportunity worth more than gold. Here's where the story turns from documented history into something closer to legend. According to the most famous version of the tale, Nathan Rothschild had a secret weapon, a courier system so fast that it beat the British government's own messengers. Using horseback riders and carrier pigeons, the Rothschild network allegedly learned of Napoleon's defeat a full 24 hours before the British public, and perhaps even before the British cabinet. When the courier reportedly burst into Nathan's office with the news that Wellington had won, Nathan Rothschild had a choice to make. Should he immediately buy government bonds, knowing their value would surge the moment victory became public? That would have been the obvious move. But according to the legend, he chose something far more devious and far more profitable. The story claims that the morning after receiving the news, Nathan walked into the London Stock Exchange and began quietly selling. Selling aggressively, selling publicly. Traders saw him unloading British bonds and panicked. The Rothschilds were considered the smartest money in Europe. If Nathan was selling, it must mean the worst had happened. Rumors spread that Britain had lost at Waterloo. Prices crashed, investors fled, and then at the very bottom, Nathan Rothschild supposedly switched, buying everything he could get his hands on. Moments later, the official news arrived. Britain had won. The panic flipped instantly into euphoria. Prices soared. And in a single, breathtaking maneuver, Nathan Rothschild allegedly made one of the greatest fortunes in financial history. This tale became so widespread, so enduring, that it became almost mythological, a symbol of cunning, power, and the terrifying leverage possessed by those who control information. But here's the question that historians still debate. Did it actually happen? The answer is complicated. There is no doubt that the Rothschilds had the fastest communication network in Europe. There is no doubt that Nathan Rothschild learned the outcome of Waterloo before most of Britain. There is no doubt that he made a fortune on British bonds in 1815. And there is no doubt that his aggressive buying helped stabilize Britain's financial system, effectively ensuring that the government could continue operating in the crucial hours after the battle. Those facts are all well documented. But whether he intentionally sparked a panic to profit from it, that is where things get murky. Some historians argue that the panic story was exaggerated, even fabricated, by political rivals in the decades that followed. Others believe it did happen, but not with the comic book villain flair the legend suggests. And then there are those who insist the truth lies somewhere in between, that Rothschild acted in his own interest, yes, but also in the interest of Britain, whose survival depended on confidence in its financial system. In other words, that Nathan Rothschild did manipulate the market, but not in the evil mastermind way the legend implies. Instead, he did it because Britain needed stability, and stability requires someone willing to take enormous risks when everyone else is running scared. Whatever the truth, one thing is undeniable. The events surrounding Waterloo cemented the Rothschilds as the most powerful banking family in Europe. Their wealth exploded. Their influence soared. They became the invisible spine of British finances, underwriting railroads, governments, industries, and even wars. And this wasn't the only time they helped save Britain. Decades later, during another crisis, the Barings Crisis of 1890, the Rothschilds again stepped in, coordinating with the Bank of England to prevent a catastrophic collapse of the British financial system. Once again, the Rothschilds had the resources, the speed, and the global reach to act when others couldn't. This is where the conspiracy element becomes impossible to avoid. Because when one family can save entire nations from bankruptcy, people start to wonder what else they can do. Over the centuries, the Rothschilds have become the centerpiece of countless theories, some grounded in financial history, others drifting into pure fantasy. But the root of all those theories can be traced back to 1815, to the idea that one man used secret information to outmaneuver governments and markets alike. And honestly, even without exaggeration, the real story is already extraordinary enough. Think about the world Nathan Rothschild operated in. No telegraphs, no phones, no radio, no internet. Every message was a race against weather, terrain, and time. In that world, being one day faster wasn't an advantage, it was a superpower. Governments fell because of slow information. Armies lost because orders arrived too late. Fortunes were made or destroyed because a letter didn't arrive on time. In that environment, the Rothschilds weren't just bankers. They were the world's first true information empire. And if history teaches us anything, it's this. The people who control capital shape the world, but the people who control information shape the future. Waterloo proved that. In the end, whether the legend is literally true or partly mythologized, the impact was the same. Nathan Rothschild emerged from 1815, not simply as a wealthy banker, but as a kingmaker, a man who understood that in a world on fire, knowledge travels faster than armies, and money flows toward those who understand events before they unfold. His actions, whatever their exact nature, helped stabilize a nation at its most desperate moment. And whether he intended to or not, he shaped the future of Europe. So, did the Rothschilds save Britain twice? In a sense, yes. Once by helping Britain finance the war against Napoleon, and again by stabilizing the economy at the very moment victory was achieved. And perhaps, if the myths are to be believed, a third time by preventing a financial panic that could have destroyed the government just hours after surviving the battlefield. More than 2 centuries later, the legend continues to fascinate because it speaks to something timeless. The idea that behind the visible battles of history, behind the kings and generals, there are hidden players making decisions in the shadows, not with swords or cannons, but with messages, knowledge, and money. And whether the Rothschilds truly orchestrated a financial masterstroke at Waterloo or simply benefited from being the fastest messengers in Europe, the lesson of the story remains the same. In war, in finance, and in history, information wins.